Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to talk about Lessons in Chemistry by Garmus. This was such a popular book a couple of years ago. It is also a book that I thought I would never get to. I just saw so much hype and I wasn't sure how much to go along with it. But then earlier this year I actually saw a couple of clips from the TV series that was adapting this book, and it just put it back on my radar, made it more appealing and more interesting to me, so I did finally pick it up. And before I get into my thoughts of this book, I do want to be really clear that, during the process of reading, I did quite enjoy this book. I think it's an engaging story. It's very clear from the off point, like, who you're meant to be cheering for, where you would want the story to go. It was a book very much where I was able to just kind of turn my brain off and just let the author guide me through their story and take me on the ride that they wanted to. And in so doing, I was able to have a good time while reading. But upon further reflection of this book and actually wanting to try and formulate some sort of review, I found myself quite surprised actually that this book itself was the thing that got popular rather than what can often be the case where an adaptation of a work comes out and that ends up drawing interest back to the book. Because my main argument for this is that the book itself is pretty straightforward, pretty simple, and the whole time while reading it I kept on thinking about how much this book would benefit from being on screen, how many scenes would benefit from visual storytelling rather than just being written on the page, and also how a screenwriter would be able to kind of neaten out this book and also flesh out certain themes that are portrayed in this book but only very, very briefly. I feel like, despite the fact that I've not seen the TV show, that screen would actually be a much better medium for telling this story. Lessons in Chemistry centres on the character of Elizabeth Zott, who is a very gifted chemist, but unfortunately is trying to make a name for herself and build out her career in the 1950s and 1960s. And so as a result of this time and the misogyny and sexism that is very prevalent of this time, she faces a relentless amount of challenges coming from many sides, but mostly it is sexism and misogyny perpetrated by men who do not believe that a woman should be in their field of work, or at least will think that if they have to put up with her, they will try and sabotage her efforts at any opportunity, from not accepting or publishing her work under her name, despite the fact that it is evidently brilliant, giving her a smaller salary or a diminished job title despite the fact that she's doing the same work, all the way up to more violent forms of sexism. We follow her early career, but the main pivotal moment of this book is when she is fired from her research job at Hastings Research Institute, mostly due to this mounting tension surrounded by this gender politics. But a personal scandal in her life is the ammunition that these men need to pounce upon her and to fire her. We then see a few years on from this that Elizabeth's life ends up taking a rather unexpected turn when she's asked to become the host of a TV cooking show called Supper at Six, and really needing the money, she ends up accepting quite reluctantly. She signed on for what is originally conceived to be quite a simple twee little show, but Elizabeth ends up absolutely revolutionising the format of this show by utilising her scientific background in order to educate the women, the housewives watching this programme, about chemistry through the medium of cooking, and empowering these women to take their intellect seriously, to take themselves seriously, especially in a world that often will not, and even giving them the courage to pursue their ambitions further alongside their roles as being wives and mothers, and teaching these women that their lives and their goals do not have to end just because they are married and have children. The main theme of Lessons in Chemistry is this prevalent sexism, both within science but also in wider society, the devaluation of women's contributions both at work and in the home, and the various ways that women navigate and either resist or prop up these oppressive systems. We see various women throughout the book who have to deal with this sexism, but Elizabeth is really the mouthpiece for what would be our modern conceptions, and I think your perception of her will really make or break your opinion of this book. Elizabeth Zott is an entertaining but sometimes quite frustrating character. Because of the way that she sees the world, she is very logical, very scientific based in her manner, in her ways of seeing the world, which can sometimes result in her being very stubborn, very no nonsense, and you can find yourself in equal measure cheering her on, as well as sometimes just finding her a little bit off-putting to read about. And yet her character can definitely be a mixed bag while you're reading it. One moment that really endeared me to her is the way that she learns to row in this book. We see her out trying to learn how to row by following other people's instructions, and she's getting really frustrated. This physical exercise and process is just not making any sense to her. But then she goes back on her own and starts researching the physics behind rowing and ends up going out the next time and being a pro. Maybe a bit unrealistic, but it reminded me so much of the movie Ice Princess, if any of you have ever watched that. Just being like, physics, that's the answer.
You know, I bet there's an exact aerodynamic formula.
When it comes to her TV show, I was very much on board with the discussion of the chemistry involved in food creation, but I did get a little bit turned off by her describing ingredients by their chemical compound names. That just felt a little bit too gimmicky, like just say salt. You can say salt, it's fine. And there are a lot of times where Elizabeth Zott does just feel more like a constructed character rather than a fully fleshed human. Though it kind of works with the rest of the characters because they also feel kind of exaggerated, kind of caricatured. And the issue with that is that a lot of the times these characters do lack any sort of nuance, and I was noticing a lot of the times where events just kind of unfold in order to serve the author's plot, rather than feeling like they arise very naturally from the characters' actions. Particularly the ending of this book, which just felt like it was wrapped up very neatly in a bow and just didn't feel very true to life. The other thing about Elizabeth Sott is that Bonnie Garmus very much seems to be writing a flat character arc with this character. Elizabeth Sott never has to change or learn anything. This book very much feels like it is about society and how society has to change in order to accept a truth that she already very well knows, and everybody else around her just has to get on board. People either need to realise that they were wrong in their initial perceptions of her and come to be completely on her team, or by the end of the book they are either dead or in jail. And I'm very aware that you can use flat character arcs very effectively, but for how much we are following Elizabeth, I would have just really loved to have seen her fail at something. But she is pretty much perfect throughout the book. I would have loved to see her find something that she just couldn't logic her way out of, but instead throughout the book she just seems almost infallible. We see moments of her struggling, but they are very quickly resolved. And I feel like you wouldn't even have had to make up something new for this book. There are plot points in this book that could very well have been the thing that she struggled with, like grief, like new motherhood. There is a chapter where she's struggling with looking after her newborn daughter on her own, but rather than it being a thing that she is struggling with, it's portrayed more as a commentary of how all new mothers feel. And she's very quickly able to get back on her feet with advice from her neighbour, and then the next 4 years of looking after her child are completely skirted over, and her daughter ends up becoming this perfect gifted child who is able to thrive as a result of Elizabeth's expert care and her logical no-nonsense parenting style. The book gives no time for dwelling on like the tricky toddler phase, and I just think it would have been really interesting to see that, because no matter how great your parenting is, you're not always in control, and you cannot be in control of another human being, especially a toddler. And yeah, my main issue with this book overall is that it is just quite simple. It's very clear from the get-go the message that this book is trying to put across, and of course we're on board with that instantly. We want Elizabeth Sott to succeed. We want women to feel empowered to take control of their lives and to fight back against the sexism that they're up against. But I actually thought this book might go a little bit further and portray a bit more of a nuanced perspective of this than it actually did, and that we might delve a little bit more into the world that this book is situated within. But it's actually quite a contained little story, which is surprising considering that she's going on this national television show and seemingly has fans from all over the world. And especially for a book that is taking place in the 1950s, 1960s, it's interesting how much this book is just almost entirely based around gender and discrimination on that basis. Discrimination on the basis of race and sexuality does get brought up, but it is just briefly nodded to and then quickly skirted past and not dwelt upon in any depth or detail. As I say, I've not seen the show in its entirety, just little clips here or there, but I actually feel like some of those stories would have been much better fleshed out and much better told on screen than on the page. Another issue that I know people have taken with this book is the fact that the tone is wildly inconsistent. It kind of fluctuates between bits of humour and levity, but also some very, very serious topics that are being addressed. Sexism, violence, death, and grief, and it fluctuates between these in a way that it can be quite jarring. But the marketing, I know, when this book first came out, was that it was quite an uplifting, very funny, rip-roaring narrative. And then within the first couple of chapters of this book, there is a sexual assault scene, and I know a lot of people took issue with that. This book does get very, very dark at times, which is realistic to the time, but I think can take some readers off guard. And as I say, was less of an issue for me because I knew about these plot points going in. But even knowing that, there are definitely times where the tone is just inconsistent. For example, this book is quite notorious for the fact that the family dog 630 gets a perspective in this book, and yeah, it's a bit weird, especially since this perspective crops up for some of the darkest moments in the book, and it almost seems like the author wanted it downplayed because it was being seen through the view of a dog, and it just felt a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit awkward, and yeah, quite jarring. Ultimately for me, Lessons in Chemistry is a book that has a very intriguing premise and an ultimate story and message that you can definitely get behind. The execution just feels a little bit uneven. At the same time, I can completely understand why so many people have flocked to this book and why they loved it. I'm very interested in watching the screen adaptation if I can get my hands on it, because I do feel like it could flesh out some of these weaker aspects of the book itself a little bit fuller. So there we go, those are all of my quite mixed thoughts about Lessons in Chemistry. Do let me know how you felt about Lessons in Chemistry. I know it's been quite a Marmite book. The people who love it, the people who hate it. I am, as I say, quite in the middle. I enjoyed the ride while I was on it, but there definitely did have criticisms for it. I would love to hear more of your thoughts down below. I hope you're all having a wonderful, wonderful day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.